Good afternoon, our viewers here on Civic Space TV, and you're very much welcome to the Women's Show. It's a show that amplifies voices of women. It's a show that amplifies the needs of women, but also the proposals that women have to offer within governance conversations. One of the reasons that this show was provided for was because we know that so many platforms on the media already exclude women. And so when it comes to conversations of governance, you will usually have very few women on some of the panels as a result of very many factors. And so the Women's Show is a platform that is meant to increase the voices of women on the media space, but also around governance discourse. And today on our show, we have two amazing women joining us, and we're going to be talking inclusion. We're going to be talking inclusion. For those of you who do not know about what inclusion is, I hope that at the end of the show, it will be one of those things that you remember. And when we talk about inclusivity, it's to say that there is no woman who is a single issue woman. All of us are come with multiple identities as a result of our socialization, as a result of our geographical location, as a result of our ethnicity, our class, our access to finances, and all that, brings on board a very unique woman. And so today we are going to be looking at persons with disabilities. And the topic for the day is the forgotten narrative of inclusion in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So where are the voices, where are the conversations around women with disabilities or persons with disabilities in the midst of this pandemic? And joining us are two amazing women. We have Shamim Nampijja and we have Nantaba Nicole Phionah, who I will in a little bit invite to just tell us a little bit about themselves and the work that they do before we dive into the conversation. So Shamim, you're very much welcome to walk us through who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much, Isabella. As she has mentioned, I am Shamim Nampijja and I work for National Union of Women with Disabilities of Uganda. I am a gender and disability rights advocate or enthusiast. Yeah, so that's about me. I am happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me and having me.
Thank you very much, Shamim. Nicole, would you like to go next?
Yeah, my name is Nantaba Nicole, and I work with Albinism Umbrella, an organization that promotes the rights of persons with albinism. And I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. So I'm going to come back to Shamim. And as we open up this conversation, because we are talking about inclusion and disability, could you just walk us through what is disability? Because I believe that very many people have a very limited understanding and scope of of who a person living with a disability is. At times, it's limited to physical disabilities, and yet we have a wide variety of aspects that would be considered under the disability umbrella.
Should I give the definition or just an example?
I think you should give us, imagine you're talking to someone who has not had access to this. And I know that because you work in the disability rights movement, some of this might come naturally and automatically, but there are so many people out there who have a very skewed understanding of what living with a disability is.
What disability is?
Yes.
Disability is, let's say, you have a functional limitation from doing daily tasks or carrying out work. Yeah, it has to do with functional limitations, but these functional limitations are also exacerbated by the barriers, yeah? So when you have barriers is when you have disability, because if you remove these barriers, the person is able to do something. So let's say most persons with disabilities are affected by the attitudinal barriers, the environmental barriers. So if we remove the negative perceptions people have towards disability, that they can't work or they're incapable, persons with disabilities show their capabilities. Yeah, but if those remain, then it just makes them incapacitated, hence the term disability. Yeah? But without the barriers, and it's just limited to the functional limitations that I walk with crutches or I am hearing impaired. Yeah.
Yes.
Without the other barriers, they can do everything as an able person can do.
And what are some of the ways that that this is manifested? Because I know you've talked about you working with crutches and working with impairments.
Crutches.
But what are some of those other impairments that you mentioned that people might not be aware of? So, for example, for a while, I did not know that, for example, people living with albinism fell under the umbrella of persons with disabilities.
With disability.
So yes. So how does that manifest? Like what are the different
we
examples?
have categories.
Yeah, the categories.
So the different categories of like mentioned persons with albinism. We also have persons with dwarfism, commonly known as little persons, but the correct term now is persons with dwarfism. We have cerebral palsy. We have deaf blindness. Deaf blindness are people who are both deaf and blind at the same time. And we have the hearing impaired who are deaf or hard of hearing. Then we also have the physical disabilities, like who uses crutches, some use wheelchairs, and then we also have persons without limbs, but they also fall under physical disabilities. Yeah? Then we have psychosocial disability. The categories I'm giving you are the ones recognized by the Persons with Disabilities Act.
Shamim has disappeared from the call. Okay, I'm going to bring on board Nicole, and please introduce yourself, the work that you do. What does the Albinism umbrella do? And then you can also continue with the categories of disability, which Shamim had embarked on before she dropped off. Yes, Nicole.
But I'd say that I work with Albinism Umbrella. Albinism Umbrella is an organization that promotes and protects the rights of persons with albinism. This is why we find that yes, as you know, that persons with albinism were not recognized, as in albinism was not recognized as a disability. But in actual sense, if you look at a person with albinism, is not like this other, okay, sorry to say, but just like, okay, let me say just these other normal people. So they also have difficulties. That is where we find that their eyes are short-sighted. They are mostly affected by the sun. So this makes it a disability. And then maybe just to add on what Shamim was saying, yes, there are lots of there are many categories of disability. But she had talked on of many, but then yes, cerebral palsy, deaf, those who are blind, and then you find that actually she had talked of many of them, and that's a few that I can add on what she was saying. Maybe she had others that she had to add on as her.
Okay, Shamim, were there any others that you had wanted to add on before we move on?
No, I think we just forgot psychosocial disability, but like I had mentioned, and as Nicole has added, what we have shared are the disability categories that have been recognized in Uganda through the Persons with Disabilities Act of 2019.
Maybe just to add on, sorry, there's also Down syndrome.
Yes.
Yes, there's also Down syndrome.
But it's not in the act right now.
Okay, and so probably those are some of the limitations that you may be able to shed light on later on. But looking at the pandemic, which is still ravaging, what were your realities as persons living with disabilities? And I know that the two of you work for institutions. Shamim, you work for the Union of Women Living with Disabilities in Uganda, and Nicole, you work for the Albinism umbrella. And so you probably have a very good idea about the face of the pandemic, not through the neutral lens of the average citizen, but the lens of the pandemic through the eyes of a person living with disability. What were some of the challenges that your constituency faced during this, during the time, from about last year when the pandemic struck? Has government been involved? Have you been supported? How has your programming changed? Yes. Shamim, would you like to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. So really, we can say that COVID-19 or the pandemic itself has disproportionately affected persons with disabilities as people that do belong to these constituents. The situation has not been good at all. If we start off, we could say like the unique disabilities, and the needs have made it hard to adjust to COVID-19 measures. We have had youth with hearing impairments being beaten by law enforcers for loitering on the streets. We have had the continuous lack of accessible communication like sign language interpretation during the presidential and Ministry of Health addresses on COVID-19. All this made it impossible for persons with hearing impairments to gain useful information on how to protect themselves from contracting the virus. Economically, as you all know, majority of persons with disabilities already live below the poverty line because of their dependence on small income generating activities, which only enable a hand-to-mouth livelihood. So there is the possibility that they will remain entrenched in poverty due to the economic effects of the pandemic. Also, these small income generating activities came to a standstill. We had the state which forced persons with disabilities to face hunger and starvation due to the lack of a steady income to sustain themselves. We employed, but unfortunately, the cuts is it spreading or like cutting down of employees could remain pandemic. So these women with disabilities that lost their jobs, they have also had to face hard to cater for their families because the lockdown and the pandemic itself dwindled down all their resources that they had. I think at this point, I can leave for Nicole to add on.
Thank you very much, Shamim. And I'll ask Nicole to come in. And I know that part of the work that the Albinism umbrella has been doing is supplying persons living with albinism with with sunscreen lotion because of the risk to skin cancer. How was that affected? I mean, how was that work affected? Because of course we had directives to stay at home. We had directives not to cross borders, and yet distribution is part of your mandate. Were you cleared off as essential workers? Did the government step in to close that gap? How did you manage during this season? Nicole.
Thank you, Isabella. Yes, during the lockdown, yes, and movement of vehicles to different districts was restricted. So, as albinism umbrella, and then we found out that since sunscreen is an essential, like it's a drug, like it's an everyday thing that a person with albinism need to survive. So hereby we got in touch with the UN. Through, as you know, yes, some other organizations were not considered as essential organizations. So hereby we got in touch with UN Human Rights. That is when we got to they provided us with vehicles, and for them they were free to move anywhere. So this also helped us to, like, we had to move to like home by home of a person with albinism, distributing sunscreens, and then even maybe just even before we could just try to, as in, send some to. That is when you find that there's some movements that UN is going to move to different districts. So we had to give UN human rights some sunscreens, and then they reached out to our people. And maybe just to add on the effect of COVID-19 to the persons with albinism. Yes, it has really affected them that much. That is when we find that many men have run away from this, from their wives or even mothers with children with albinism. So this is where you find that many mothers have remained as single mothers, and which is also kind of a burden to one person helping out with these many children that they give birth to. And then also we find that since the first very lockdown, there was a total shutdown of everything. So we found that there were an increase in cases of skin cancer, since many could not access this organization where they get sunscreens from. And as you know, skin cancer is something that is terrible to a person. So that is when you find out if there is a high increase in skin cancer cases, so that could also lead to death of some people. And then we also saw that many persons with albinism have they have small businesses. Small businesses, they are close their capital that they had for their small businesses for their survival. And then this leaves them jobless. So they are hardly affected due to the COVID-19 issue. And then there's also been a high like domestic violence of within these families, since they have no say. And then you find that there's also been a high level of unwanted pregnancies, since they cannot access this sexual as in SRH services, and movement is also limited. Hence, the community being affected that much due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Nicole. And maybe the question that comes to my mind is, does the government, for example, provide sunscreen to members, to people living with albinism, or is that a function that is very specific to civil society organizations? Because if we are talking about access to health, and we know that people living with albinism are at high risk of contracting skin cancer, were there places where this was subsidized by the state? Is this something that the COVID task force considered?
Surely no. That's what I can say. Government, because even up to now, what we are trying to, as in, work on is that is when we want to see that these sunscreens are provided in most of the health centers that are accessible that are accessible to these people. But in regards to that, government hasn't done anything on that, and we are still fighting on it. That is when you find that with this civil society organization, they help out with the sunscreen. So that's when you get to get the sunscreen for these people. But the government hasn't put this in action, but we are really fighting for it to be done.
Okay, and maybe I will bring in Shamim. Speaking broadly about access to health, which is a universal right. Every citizen of this country has the right to health. In your opinion, do you think that when it comes to health of persons with disabilities, that there is commitment by the state? Because if we are saying that sunscreen could reduce the risk of contracting skin cancer, and yet the state is not providing for sunscreen for persons living with albinism. If we are saying that we are looking at the right to health, but borders were banned during the lockdown, and yet you had persons who had physical disabilities and couldn't move. Where is that middle ground? Did you, as the disability movement, for example, have the opportunity to interact with the task force during this period? Did you provide recommendations to them, and were those taken or were they not taken? When we look at aspects, for example, of immunization, vaccination, is there a provision, for example, for persons with disabilities to be able to easily access vaccination? So let's talk access to health and how the pandemic might have exposed an already bad situation or worsened it, and if there is true commitment to actually support persons with disabilities.
Thank you for bringing up the question on access to health, to services. So if we talk about just health for now, the pandemic just worsened access to health services for women with disabilities or persons with disabilities in general, because already the barriers to access to health are pre-existing. They fear going to hospitals because of the negative language that health workers use to address them, the inaccessible hospital equipment, let's say the beds are too high, they lack chairs to use to wheeling persons with disabilities. So with all these things already existing, the pandemic just worsened it, in that the borders were stopped, yet persons with disabilities largely depend on border transportation because of its efficiency. It picks them from their homes and takes them direct to the doorstep of where they're going. But since that was taken away, most of them have had to actually whether the health effects on their own or to depend on their families for support. So with the vaccination exercise right now, I can say there's a campaign that is being spearheaded by NUWODU to calling the government actually to give affirmative action to persons with disabilities, because they were already left out of the relief program. And now we have the vaccination exercise going on. And as you know, persons with disabilities live in more rural areas and have limited access to information on all these things, because the campaign is even not yet being talked about on the television stations. I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen it a lot on social media. So even the messages, when they come on, there's no sign language interpretation to show that the vaccination exercise is going on. Please go do this, do that. So tell a friend to go together to the vaccination points. And yet also the vaccine is even scarce right now, so it's for chasing here.
Yes.
So this situation actually has not helped access to services, let's say for health, anything for persons with disabilities. It's been compounded by the pre-existing barriers, and the government, as much as disabled voice organizations who are part of the task force, I know this for certain because NUWODU was part of it in the first lockdown. They called for affirmative action. They called for prioritization of persons with disabilities, and were engaged, but they were engaged at a later stage, not at the stage of planning that, hey, we're planning for relief aid, organizations of persons with disabilities, how are we going to meet your members? They were just brought on midway when, let's say, the food distribution was being given out. And even then, when persons with disabilities were asked, like, did you get the relief aid? They're like, no. When we went there, the lines were long. And
yes.
if someone, yes, the lines were long, and most persons with disabilities cannot stand for long. Those that have invisible disabilities, let's say like the deaf, they were not given because people are like, no, you're lying. You're not a deaf person. How are you going to prove to someone that you're deaf?
That you're deaf,
So even that was a point of discrimination for them. And also, like most mentioned, they faced sexual harassment from there when they're trying to get the relief aid, because the relief workers were like, we shall give you food if you do this and this and this for us. So this just further added on to the discriminations we already face as persons with disabilities. And it also made them suffer the consequences of COVID. Yeah, these socioeconomic consequences, because they have no points of redress. That where do we go to get support for this?
Yes.
So it also incapacitated the ability of the disabled voice organizations to a point. As much as they were engaged, they could not do everything without the support of the government.
Okay, thank you very much, Shamim. And maybe moving on from education, because clearly from the picture that you have painted, there is the support is minimal, but even the recognition of the unique challenges that persons with disabilities face are not, those are not taken into consideration even with the planning. And I know that a few weeks ago we hosted Market Women, and we were talking, and at one point, one of the questions I asked was, okay, did you receive the relief fund? You know, the Prime Minister's relief fund. Was there special consideration put for persons with disabilities? Did they, for example, ask you for your members that they could be able to get this relief fund? Have you heard from any of your members that they were able to get this relief fund, especially for those who needed it? Matt?
I think the majority we have heard from,
the
majority I have personally heard from, did not get access to the relief fund.
Oh dear.
And I've talked to my colleagues in different districts, and I've asked them, like, did women with disabilities or persons with disabilities in Kamuli get anything? And my colleagues said that they approached her to register the names.
Yes.
But on asking them, did they get anything, they said no. Yeah. So even in the relief fund, like, people were looking forward to it. Yeah. And we also wanted it for women with disabilities who are really in hard situations. Yeah. But unfortunately, I am yet to see a person with a disability come out and say, I received their 100,000. I will not lie to you. I am yet to see that.
Okay, maybe let's pull in Nicole. Nicole, what was your experience, especially specifically to persons living with albinism? Was the situation different? Did your constituency get at least a relief fund?
Okay, surely. Thank you. Surely, also the community didn't receive. If because me personally, okay, I just had one who told me that I received the money. And by the way, just to talk about that, I really I had to follow the address of the president, but unfortunately, on the category that I had to receive this fund, persons with disabilities weren't among.
Yes.
Yeah, they weren't considered on that in regards to the relief fund. So this also left them out hanging, and thinking maybe I don't know what the consideration was, but they weren't considered. Yes, they weren't considered.
All right. So clearly around health, you are really not included in any of these processes. But let's talk education, because we know that we know that schools have been closed. We know that that education is supposed to be an equalizer. You know, education should be that space that we go to, and irrespective of your background, irrespective of your socialization, you're able to have access to a resource that can spring you into another realm or into success. But we also know that when it comes to education, there has been the notion of online schooling. There's been the concept of teaching via radio and TV,
newspapers.
How is this working with you? Because it's already complicated in Uganda, given the issues of access to the internet, given the issue of access to the infrastructure to be able to study. It's complicated given the aspect of geographical location. So how is the disability movement handling education within this within the context of the pandemic. She has jumped off. Okay, let's come to you, Shamim. I believe you had the question.
Yes. Oh no, could you repeat it a bit? I have the background, but the direct
yes.
not yet.
So the question is, how is the disability movement handling the issue of education within the pandemic in Uganda? Because we know that we already have problems, okay? But given that already there are unique challenges that persons with disabilities face, how is that working? Because I know that you already talked about the issue of translation, but then, for example, people who are visually impaired, how are we dealing with issues of braille? How about the people who have mental disabilities? Like, I can't wrap myself around that, and yet education is supposed to be an equalizer. So after 2 years, shall we even be able to catch up? Yeah.
You raise really a good point with education.
Yeah.
And I cannot even tell you that I know how students with disabilities are actually grappling with the situation, because for me as a bystander or an onlooker, I just tell people that, my goodness, the education right now is affected, and how are people going to recover? So you recall that the government of Uganda introduced digital classes.
Yes.
And I think every weekend there are people having lessons from UBC. I think that's the channel. But if we talk about technology, and digitization, our internet penetration is really, really low. Yes. And if you talk about the equipment that people need to sustain digital livelihoods, they are quite expensive. So you imagine the situation for families of children with disabilities. How are they handling this situation? They don't have access to televisions in their homes, because the fact that they live in remote rural areas makes the infrastructure even harder for them to do what? To have to attend these online classes. If the television is there, but the infrastructure, how are they going to attend the online classes? And if you go through the mobile route of saying like they have smartphones, I can like tell you that not even 5% of persons with disabilities have smartphones. And the other thing is they also cannot afford the charges to sustain the digital livelihoods, that mobile data and also a smartphone. I talked to a few of my friends and I asked them like, so how has it been internet access for you? And they're like, right now, because of COVID, access to the internet is a luxury. It's not a human right. I have to decide if I want to eat or be on the internet. And I need to eat if I am to be on the internet. So I have let that go because I need to live. You see, even the resources are quite few and quite little for them to be buying data to have the online classes, let's say for students with disabilities, And now, if you talk about the visually impaired, how are they accessing these services? How are they accessing the education? I believe for students with disabilities, there's going to be education stagnation. It's going to stagnate, and there's also the possibility that they may not be able to go back to school given the financial effects of the pandemic on their families, And recently I read that the government is introducing radio classes. I think it kicked off this week on Monday. But I thought of it when I was like, so how are students with disabilities going to follow these lessons or these classes? Already the government failed to distribute the radio sets. And yet it's rolling out. So there is a clear disparity between what the government is doing and what the citizens are actually going through to receive these lessons.
Mm. And I'm going to thank you very much, Shamim. And I'm going to bring in Nicole to just to add anything what you have said around education, but also to just add to shed some more light on the aspect of special needs education, special needs teachers, because we also know that a lot of private schools have indefinitely let go of their human resource.
Yeah.
We know, for example, that early childhood education has suffered a lot, and we know that a lot of nursery school teachers are not working. But then now, when you bring in the aspect of special needs teachers, who I know are already in short supply, okay, is the government buffering this? Like, is there any plan to ensure that the aspect of special needs education is catered to? And is there any conversation that is happening with maybe the National Curriculum Development Center to see how this online studying or this online curriculum incorporates special education? But also, are there conversations with the Ministry of Education around these unique realities? Nicole?
Thank you, Isabella.
Yeah.
Just to add on what Shamima said, yes, surely, children with albinism are left behind in regards to the educational setup that they want to bring out now. Because yes, you can find that many families of these people are poor, as in a poor. If one have a radio, that is something that they could treasure now. But then that is when you find that maybe they need they could need maybe like electricity. Let me say sometime if the radio is not used, then maybe a TV set is used. They're missing out. So then on the issue of the special needs teacher, to me, there's nothing I've heard as me. There's nothing I've heard on that. So all I'm seeing that they are putting all the efforts on the radio, as in the use of the radios. In regards to educating the children who are home now due to the pandemic, but then that is when you find that there is an issue of them saying that the special needs teacher, okay, like then the fee is quite high, and maybe the country is not receiving that much as per now.
Yes.
But there is nothing that is put in place than radio sets that they want to use now, yet they aren't accessible to all the persons with the other children with disabilities.
Okay, but now, and I'm going to bring Shamim in because Nicole talks about the issue of expense and cost of special needs teachers, and whereas I want to hear that, I also know that the government is tasked with there are agencies that are tasked with planning and budgeting, and so I want to assume that if, for example, the Ministry of Education was planning, they need to be able to plan and be inclusive of all the learners under their docket, but also in the same breath, if you're planning for teachers, then you must be able to look at your human resource gaps, probably around special needs educators, and be able to plan for that. And so the question I have for you, Shamim, is do you feel like the agencies, the relevant agencies, but also the government broadly, is having genuine conversations around inclusion of persons with disabilities through the lens of budgeting and also through the lens of ensuring that the systems that aid and make your lives more comfortable, and so that you're able to live more dignified lives are put in place, so that we're not having a conversation of cost. Because if you are budgeting well, then the conversation of cost, in my opinion, shouldn't arise.
Thank you. The talk around inclusion is quite big, but in reality, it's just talk. Yeah. We can have government. We have had interfaces with government representatives, and they're like, yes, we're inclusive, we want to do this, we're going to do that, but in reality, it's just not there. This entire situation has shown that persons with disabilities in all sectors were unplanned for and unaccounted for. If you look at what's going around in education, it's everything that it's being built, let's say, for persons without disabilities, because if you know there's a certain vulnerable community out here and whose entire livelihood or the betterment of their lives would depend on education, like we say, it's an equalizer. For persons with disabilities, education is probably a means to a better life. Yeah. But when you look at it closely and you scrutinize it, you do not see any government intervention in this area. That have they put in place classes for children with special needs? How about the teachers, like you have mentioned? Are they being considered? No. I have really not had any conversations around education or what the government is doing in line with special needs education. Not yet.
Okay. But also, is that something that, because I know that you said that that you're included on the task force, is that a conversation that has been had at task force level?
At task force level, no, I think at the task force originally, the task force was to see to it that persons with disabilities are not as affected by that pandemic, yeah? And this largely focused on offering the relief aid.
Yes.
Just the relief aid, and also to make sure that the communication was inclusive, because in that period, I know that the Ministry of Health put out inclusive communication on the prevention of COVID, the SOPs.
Yes.
So far, in my opinion and from my observations, that is what I have seen. I have not had conversations around special needs education or education at all.
But then, and again, I'm sorry that I am, okay, not really sorry, but
okay.
that I'm dwelling a lot on this, because now you shed more light on the conversations around the task force. I thought that the reason that we had a task force was to look at the pandemic from from top level planning, not necessarily as little as not as minute as distribution of food. I thought that the reason that there's a task force and that you are included was to ask that, okay, on education, how are we dealing with this? On health, how are we dealing with this? But it looks like you are not even on the national task force. You are on the task force for food distribution, which is problematic.
Isabella, now, like, you see how you're explaining it, eh? Yes. Those are the challenges of disability. We are just thought of later. And if we're added onto something, it's as a token that, okay, we have representation from organizations of persons with disabilities, and for people, that is enough because they want to check off a box. Yeah?
Yes. So what I'm
here, engagement on the national task force was after so much noise when the disabled organizations saw that persons with disabilities were being affected. There was no one saying anything to them or about them or caring for their livelihoods. Yeah. Then that galvanized the organizations of persons with disabilities to act and to engage the government. But as to what the task force was for, or the nitty-gritties, I am really not aware of what they actually talked about.
Yes. No, but and I'm laughing, but it's very sad because it's very sad because you were basically okay, that is quite sad. And I hope that part of the advocacy work that we are all doing is to ensure that the voice of inclusion is a voice that is heard at every level. We cannot just have a discussion around inclusion on distribution of food, and yet even on the distribution of money, you are still left out. And I think the conversations around power and access to resource become more visible from what you have just said. That because the powers that be will demand who comes to the table to have conversations around resources. But it also just goes ahead to show that inclusion, like you said, is a lot of hot air talk, you know, because, and it's not just with the people living with disabilities. It is with the market women that we've had on this show. With it's around the mental health crisis that we have had on this show. That even where we are saying that the amount of emotional and psychological pressure that the people are dealing with, we still don't have investment around that. And so when we talk about inclusion, we can comfortably conclude that the policies, that the conversations that are being had around the pandemic are very neutral to the extent of the person who is designing them, and they're not inclusive to the people who do not fit the ideal description of the human being that is at the table designing these policies, which is problematic, which is also one of the reasons that conversations on inclusion and diversity have become normal. But the fact that Uganda has still refused, you know, to implement and show that we are inclusive and we are diverse, even in the midst of a pandemic, is just worrying. But yes, Nicole, you had something to say.
I don't really. I was just enjoying what you were saying, but yes,
Yes.
we are really left out in everything since we lack like representation of maybe of ourselves.
Yes.
So I think that they are planning for they are mostly in most cases leaving persons with disability behind, hence making their lives miserable in most cases.
Okay, that and I hope, I don't know, yes, but I hope that the disability movement can push, and I hope that everyone who is listening in can be part of the conversations to push for inclusion in the true sense of inclusion, and not necessarily tokenist inclusion, because asking people to be part of your distribution team is not inclusion. That is actually you're only fathering abuse. You're not even including them. But
I think we have hope. We have hope on inclusion because we now have a Minister of State for Disability, and it's quite a cause for celebration for persons with disabilities, because it's a woman with a disability, and she is very passionate about gender and disability inclusion. So we really have hope in Miss Helen Grace Asamo. We really do have hope.
Yes, and I know that she's an amazing woman who is very passionate about it.
She is.
But you see, here is the thing. He might just be a representation at national level of what is happening to us at task force level. And so we must ensure, when I talk about support, we must ensure that she's actually being part of the conversations that matter in cabinet. Yeah, because we don't have a situation where at cabinet level, she's also in conversations which are the equivalent of food distribution. We should be having conversations at the level of inclusion around education, inclusion around inclusive education, inclusive health, inclusive mental support, inclusive everything. Because when we talk about inclusion, it's an aspect that touches literally every sector, you know. And so we must demand, we must ensure that even if she has been given that position, it is something that she should be included. We should see her inclusion everywhere. Yes.
Sure.
I do believe I do believe she has been really instrumental in the disability movement. She has a lot of achievements for disability. So her being a person with a disability, and especially a woman, to us we see hope and faith that the conversation around inclusion and integration of women and girls with disabilities in, let's say, the government agenda will actually do what take place with her at the helm. So we really have faith in our Minister of State for Disability. Really do.
And I wish her the very best. I know she's an amazing woman. Yeah, she's amazing. And so we will do our best to ensure that we support her and also work hand in hand with you to ensure that the conversations on inclusion are embraced holistically and not as a tokenist approach. And so we're coming to the end of the show. And as we come to the end of the show, I'd like you to just give your parting shots in regard to inclusion, in regard to the pandemic, but also futuristically, how can the government be more supportive to persons living with disability so that their dignity is not questioned at any one point in time? And I'll start with Nicole. Nicole, do you want to go first? Nicole?
Yes, Isabella. Okay, thank you. And the only message that maybe I would like to pass on is on inclusivity for persons with albinism. That is when from bottom to top. So this they should always regard persons with albinism as anyone else. But due to the on the side of planning, they should cater for these people because they also need a good life for survival. And then maybe we can also fight for other representation of persons with disability in all levels. So that is when you find that if you find that we have maybe Honorable Asamo, we need also maybe a youth like on like in different levels to cater for the different groups of persons with disability.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Nicole, for your submissions. I'm going to ask Shamim to come in with her final submissions for the day.
For me, all I can say is that Uganda did ratify the UNCRPD, and we also have the Persons with Disabilities Act of 2019 as amended. So these are really, these documents obligate the state to ensure good lives, let's say good lives for persons with disabilities in every sphere of lives. Yeah. So I would just like to encourage the government, the state, also the non-state actors to walk the talk of inclusion. Let's not just say that we are inclusive when we're not making an effort to integrate persons with disabilities in our everyday lives or sectors or whatever. Yeah. So I think that will go a long way, because if we work hand in hand, like they said, disability is everyone's problem, not just the person with the disability. So if we work hand in hand and live up to the obligations of the UNCRPD and the Persons with Disabilities Act, I believe there is like a better society for persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Shamim. Thank you very much, Nicole, for joining us on Civic Space TV here on the Women's Show to talk about the reality of persons with disabilities, but also to talk about inclusion and how inclusion can be made a reality beyond just the talk. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for standing with the movement. And I hope that everyone who has been listening in has learned a lot from what you have said, but I also hope that all of them can be more aware of the unique realities of persons living with disabilities, and also next time not look at issues from a linear line. I mean, through a linear lens, but to say that no woman, no person is a single issue person. You have the experiences of a woman who is in the market are very different from the experiences of a woman who is in the market and has a disability, and they're also very different from the realities of a woman who is middle class and works in the private sector, and very different from the woman who is middle class and works in the public sector. Those are very different realities. And so even as we plan, we cannot plan as if women are a single issue, you know, constituents, but it's to say that there are different realities for every woman who comes to the table. And so thank you very much and have yourselves a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. And I hope that for those of us who have joined us for the show, you have enjoyed it. Have fun, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much. Cheers.